Welcome to Law Firm Marketing Mastery. I'm Christopher Small. Law Firm Marketing Mastery brings together the best coaches in the industry to teach you how to crush it with your law firm. Imagine having a bunch of experienced mentors teaching you their expertise, packing decades of research, testing, and tough lessons into a concise curriculum. I've created one of the premier law firm coaching programs available anywhere, and it's free. This is a show that I wish I had a decade ago. Now, this show is about you, and I'm here to help you start and build your best law firm. So make sure to stay up to date with everything going on here, as well as getting some killer free stuff by signing up for the newsletter at lawfirmmarketingmastery.com. If you're new to the show but want to know more about what I teach here at Law Firm Marketing Mastery, check out the Getting Started page at lawfirmmarketingmastery.com/start-here. That's where I've got the fundamentals of starting and building a successful law firm, such as choosing a niche, naming your firm, search engine optimization, internet marketing, leadership, mindset, and more. That stuff is all obviously extremely important to your success, so make sure you get a handle on that as well. I've also got Law Firm Confidential, a members-only site dedicated to starting and building a successful law firm, and the Inner Circle, an exclusive mastermind group for lawyers wanting to take their firm to the next level. Details on that at lawfirmmarketingmastery.com, or just give me a call or even email me at chris@lawfirmmarketingmastery.com, and I'll tell you exactly what you need to know to get started with that. I'm looking forward to meeting all of you here at Law Firm Marketing Mastery.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Law Firm Marketing Mastery. I'm honored and excited to welcome today's guest to the show. She's a clinical psychologist who currently practices in Milwaukee. In addition to doing the things a normal psychologist does, and I know she's going to probably get after me a little bit for saying that, making those generalizations, she's also got a lot of experience helping people become their best self, which is what we're going to talk about today. So please join me in welcoming to the show Julie Helmrich. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
It's my pleasure, definitely, and I'm glad we could connect. And you know, I before we even get into all the stuff about how you can make us better, I was curious a little bit about sort of the lack of a bio on you that I could find on the internet. Even on your website, you know, you really gear it toward helping people find the best person for them, and sort of, I guess, go a little bit away from selling yourself or even having your credentials on there in a big way. So I'm just want to know a little bit more about who you are and how you got to where you are.
You want the Reader's Digest version or the real one?
I want the real one.
Okay. Well, I was born on a farm in Iowa. I'm the fifth of 10 kids, and I probably would have become an architect with my natural proclivities. I have good visual spatial, and I'm very interested in, I draw house plans for fun.
Okay.
But when I was 14, there was a suicide in my life, and that definitely changed the course. And it was partly of my, it was partly because of, let's see how to put this. It was partly because of losing somebody you love, but also this was somebody that I thought actually was her best self, sort of use your language. She was 21, I was 14, so you know, to a 14-year-old, 21-year-olds are adults, and she's who I wanted to grow up to be like. And then she ended up shooting herself. So it was the journey away from geometry and the idea that I might do something with architecture became a journey about trying to understand how somebody who looked that happy could be that sad. So I got into psych. My high school English teacher said, I thought I was interested in guidance counseling. She said, no, what you're interested in is called psychology. And that was the first time I'd heard the word. Mm-hmm. I didn't know a psychologist. I went to the college that I went to. My big college search was, I heard the neighbor say, Loras College is good in psychology. So honestly, I went there. That was my big college search. And along the way, many people tapped me on the shoulder to just give me a little bit of a direction. For instance, I didn't know anything about graduate school. Neither of my parents finished high school. So that whole journey was not a known one in our family. And along the way, I had a lot of people sort of tap me on the shoulder and suggest the next step. So, you know, when I was getting near to the end of my undergraduate degree, the faculty said, you know, one of them pulled me into his office and said, we were talking about the undergraduates, and you should go into graduate school. And I said, what's graduate school? So, then I went in that direction, and while I was doing my master's, somebody said, what you're interested in is called clinical psych. So, I went in that direction. Along the way, I became, so I had a very healthy skepticism about professional psychology and psychiatry right from the beginning, because when you're 14 and they discharge somebody on a Thursday and she buys a gun on Friday and shoots herself, you sort of begin to be a little skeptical about, do these people really know what they're doing? So I learned, I developed very quickly this idea that most people don't need a psychologist, but they could use a lot of psychology, because I've been in counseling and my, therapists have been helpful to me and spiritual directors, but really what helped me the most was studying psychology, just understanding how does the human psyche work.
Right.
Which is why when you and I were talking earlier, I said, something like the big difference between people who are extreme achievers or people who are really flourishing. The big difference between them and the average person in America, I can't speak for other cultures, but is their personal psychology. It's how they think about themselves and the world, and how they think things work, their own belief systems about how things work. That's really the easiest way to put it. So part of event, I've done very traditional jobs in psychology, like working in county mental health centers and state hospitals and the VA and that sort of thing. But I've always been very teachy in how I approached the work that I did with individuals and with couples, because of my own experience that, wow, if they just understood how this if they understood the science of this, they would know why what they're doing, doesn't work. So, I usually use the example of, you can't break the law of gravity. You can break your leg trying to break it, but you can't actually break the law. But if you understand the law of gravity, you can build bridges and museums and amazing things because working with it. So there are those kinds of laws in psychology, and people who are extreme achievers, I think, are people who aren't debating too many of those laws. They work with them. They go with those laws, as opposed to trying to create some sort of, I always call it their silly own path, which probably sounds very counterintuitive, especially maybe for your audience, but it's really not. If you were to think about architects needing to work with the law of gravity, anybody who's an entrepreneur who wants to be a high achiever actually has to work with psychological laws. You actually can't break most of them. You can break yourself trying to break them, but you can't break the laws.
Right.
And that, I think, is the big personal psychology difference between average people who are kind of using trial and error and bouncing along in life, and people who are really intentional. They're very intentional in how they're going forward, and I suppose to other people, they look lucky, but for those of us who know what they're up to, they don't look any luckier than somebody who wins a marathon looks lucky.
Right.
They look like they knew what they were doing, and they trained, and they modified when they discovered this or that about their training, and the same way with psychology. Emotions are very much like muscles.
Yeah.
Same exact thing.
And you're kind of doubly qualified, too, for this show, because you also you own a private practice. Is that right? Essentially, I don't know if that's the right word for it.
I own right. So I'm in business in two different ways. So, I'm self-employed in private practice. But the other thing that we do here is, sort of putting my walking the talk here, is that I created ways for people to get high-quality psychological input without having to go into a psychologist's office, which is so I run a little company called Iron Psych, and the point of it is strength-based coursework. So here's an example. The typical person, the number one thing that people come into therapy for at an individual level is like anxiety or depression. Well, you can go for therapy for that, or you can actually study a couple of things and work on them, and the odds are you will be able to work yourself through most of that. So So for anxiety, if you understood the science of courage and you really understood what people who look fearless, but they're not really fearless, they just understand how to suppress their fear and get themselves to take action at the same time. That's what we call, that's actual courage, is like being able to suppress my fear and get myself to take action at the same time. And there's a whole science to that. So you could go to a therapist for anxiety, or you could study courage and apply the science of that to your life and then watch what happens to your anxiety. So that's why we created the Science of Courage course. And with depression, believe it or not, depression is very much connected to anger. And anger, in the old days we called depression anger in as opposed to anger out. Anger out meaning bar fights, anger in meaning depression. Anger in is actually mostly managed through better interpersonal relationships, and a big part of that has to do with becoming a forgiving person. So that's what the Science of Forgiveness course through Iron Psych is.
Right, that's cool. I think it's a great concept, and you know, I guess I can't speak for all lawyers, but I think in general, that is probably how we would approach a problem. It's because we're very research-based, you know, so we think, okay, here's a problem. I want to learn all about it so I can figure out how to answer it. And when you understand the core concepts, then you can sort of apply those to, in what we're talking about, in your life or in your actions, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to having somebody just tell you to do something. I mean, you have much more experience with this than I do, but it seems like if you understand the reason why, or the core concepts behind why you should be doing something, it can also make it easier to do those things. As opposed to you just going into an office and somebody just says, you know what, you have depression, you should just do X, Y, Z, and you'll get out of it, or saying, look, this is sort of the root of all of this, you know. If you can sort of see this coming and face it and then do these things to help you get out of it, that will make a difference. Okay.
Yeah, you know, there's something that you say, though, which is I'm glad you put it exactly the way you put it, Chris, because I think the number one reason that people, well, let me say something real simple. On any given day in America, 10% of the people really could use a therapy session. Like, that's how bad things are for them. 2% go. 20% are actually happy, and there's 70% who fall in a category of what psychologists call languishing. They would endorse a statement like, well, I'm not depressed, but I'm not that happy either. That's a lot of people not in that 20% category.
Right.
Now, if you look at the national narrative about, why things aren't so great for people, the number one, our belief is that it has to do with childhood. It has to do with the core. It has to do with what's the deep problem here. And mostly it's not, those things contribute without question, but if those were the causes of the current day problematic things that most people are facing, then everybody who had that thing happen to them would be having that same experience. And the reality is, it's just untrue.
Right.
For example, with trauma, we all know about post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a good thing that people now know about that, but most people don't know about post-traumatic growth. And the reality is, with trauma, 2 out of 3, you don't wish trauma on anybody, but when you start looking at this kind of effect, 2 out of 3 people with trauma are stronger because of it. 1 out of 3 have been broken because of it, and they need some help. But 2 out of 3, trauma, they've worked through trauma, and sometimes with a therapist, but often with all sorts of other methodologies. But part of what our national narrative is, if you had a childhood this or that, then you're broken. And, bummer for you, your future is going to be really difficult, and don't tell anybody you were broken, because then they will know the truth, which is that you're never really going to be able to achieve that much because you were basically broken. Because that's our national narrative, that our childhood actually creates our future. But what actually creates our future, besides belief systems, are developing the appropriate skills and then applying them. And that's really what's necessary, because you can I could even look back to the person who killed herself when she was 21, when I was 14, and I can say, I can see historical connections to all of that. And then as the older you get, people have had those exact same situations, and you go, they didn't kill themselves.
Right.
So the difference is not childhood experiences. The difference really is, given what, it's basically, given the hand that life has dealt you to play, did you really figure out how to play it well, or are you still saying, this is a hard hand to play? Yeah, it is a hard hand to play. Now, do you want to learn how to play it well, or do you want to go, man, I don't have a bad hand?
Right.
And I don't mean that to make fun of people who had very rough situations, because my favorite people on the planet that I think deserve parades are the people who come into my office with trauma and other things, and they leave as thrivers. Now, then they don't get parades, and they should. And they don't get parades because we don't talk about trauma. We don't talk about a brokenness that is healed. And if we talk about it, we only talk about it after the fact, after it's all over, after, I've gone from broken to surviving to thriving, and then I can tell, the hero's journey, that sort of story. But we don't do the talking along the way. In fact, for your listeners, I would argue that that's one of the things, if they really want to accelerate their journey, they want to accelerate, wherever it is they're trying to get to, probably the number one thing that they could do for themselves, besides apply the right techniques, would be to be with a group of people, like what you're doing for them, I think is a very good thing. To be with a group of people who understand, A, that you're on a journey, B, that you've come from somewhere, proof that you're on a journey, and C, that you're going somewhere, and that story is about challenge. It's about problems. It's about overcoming them. It really isn't about, I was super talented and then I got successful. Like or most of us are talented enough, and then there's a gutsiness to figure out what I need to know and then apply it. And that's a lonely journey. If you think about that, 7 out of 10 people are unhappy. Partly that's because they're not able to make themselves do that which they know how to do, or they don't really know what to do, and they're sort of wandering.
I can see a lot of, I talked to a lot of lawyers, some that are doing well, some that are doing bad, and it's kind of pulled what you've been saying around to this and what we do is, I think that some people sort of allow their stories or the hand that they've been dealt to be sort of a crutch or kind of an excuse for the future, or an excuse not to sort of push forward. And some people use their story and their experiences sort of as a springboard to new things or to better things.
Yeah, and I think one of this is what I mean by something of like what scientific psychology did for me, because what you just described in my head, I can on the one hand endorse it, and on the other hand I say there's a big difference between the sort of using my story and my experience to propel me forward towards something, and having it be an excuse. And the big difference between sort of how it's probably running around in your head and how it's running around in my head is that I just heard a thing called, stages of change science. Because people don't change. They don't get up one day and say, I'm going to take this hand that life dealt me and I'm going to, I'm going to make it. And then they make it. What actually happens is that people sit there for a while in a stage that we call pre-contemplation, where if you say, how come you're not doing more with your life? They'll say, what's wrong with what I'm doing with it?
Right.
Like, I'm okay. Like, back off. And then they move into a stage that goes, we call it contemplation. And in that stage, they're saying, I need to change something. When? I don't know. Next 6 months, 8 months, something like that. And all they're doing really is they're thinking about it. They're not doing much of anything. They're pondering. Then they move into a stage called preparation. In preparation, they've said, okay, I am going to do something, which means I need to listen to Chris's show, or I need to get a book, or I need to sign up for something, or I need to, I need to start watching videos on this. Whatever, right. They make a decision. They need to start doing something. They're preparing for it, and maybe their preparation is something like, I need to improve my internet speed because who wants to watch videos that keep buffering all the time? So then, they upgrade their internet, or they're looking around to figure out, what show they want to listen to, or, who they want. Maybe they want a mentor. They're thinking about it. And then action, they actually start doing it. They actually start doing the work. Well, that's where all that other stuff is interior work for the most part. But at the point where they're doing action, that's when everybody else thinks they've made a decision to change something. But if you really understand the change process, you go, no, actually, this has been going on for, probably a couple of years before they get to the point where they're doing the actual work that the typical person coming into therapy, for instance, has been thinking about it for 2 years. That's a really good example. So walking in the door, they're kind of at the action step. So when you mentioned something on my website.
Let's take a quick time out for a sec. I'm sure there are a ton of you out there thinking, yeah, this all sounds great, but how do I actually do this stuff? How do I implement it? Let me introduce you to a program I've created called Law Firm Confidential. Law Firm Confidential is about one thing, results. I've unlocked the secrets of my success in step-by-step how-to fashion so you can see the results with your firm that you know you deserve. And if you're just starting out, what I've created is the best how to start a law firm program around. Don't sit around and let your life pass you by. Go to lawfirmmarketingmastery.com/confidential today to find out how you can create the law firm of your dreams. Now, back to the good stuff.
Part of what the purpose of the website was to really try to meet people where they're at in each of those stages.
Sure.
Maybe you're in contemplation. Well, there's some stuff here to read.
Right.
Once they get into action, then that's a really good place to sign up, to be in what you and I are doing with the plat. Like, that's an action thing. Like, it costs money, it takes effort, you get in, you do the work. That's action. Then, now the next stage is what's called maintenance, which is like, okay, guess what, I made the change. But the stage after that, and this is, I think, a really demoralizing thing for most people, especially if they don't know to expect it. The stage after that is called relapse. And everybody relapses. Everybody relapses. An awful lot of people did really well on their menu planning and their running and all of what they were doing until about December 23rd. And then they ate everything in sight.
Right.
And then now they feel guilty. But if you know that relapse is a part of change, what I try to teach everybody I'm working with, whether it's students or people that are coaching or private practice clients, that change is not a straight line. It's actually a spiral that goes up and the spiral gets larger each time. And every time you circle around, you've relapsed. And then what happens? Well, then you get back up, and now you're in contemplation again. You're thinking, I really need to stick with this. You prepare differently. You take different actions. And then that improves things. And then you're in a maintenance thing. And if you really, really have every single skill that you need, then you will be permanently changed. But for the most part, we don't pick up every single skill that we need the first go around. People who quit smoking, for example, it usually takes 7 good faith efforts for them to quit smoking. And then many smokers will say 6-7 years later they're not smoking, but they're still craving, and they're still working, doing the interior work of becoming a non-smoker, like somebody who doesn't even think about smoking anymore.
Right.
So the change process is like that, and I think especially for entrepreneurs, that relapse thing is something to expect.
Right.
If you expect it, you don't freak out about it. You just sort of go, crap, life just informed me again that I have skill sets that are undeveloped, and I need to develop them. And then a lot of people just sit there and wallow for a while, and I think, big deal. That's what we human beings do. Don't worry about it. It doesn't mean you have to change your whole identity. It just means yeah, you're going to wallow for a while until you go, I'm sick and tired of wallowing, and then you do another go at it where you solve another problem or 2 or 10. And, that's where that joke comes from, that, overnight successes take about 10 years.
Right.
Because there's a lot of relapse that's happening in that. There's a lot of, it feels like going backwards. It's only going backwards if you didn't learn a single thing.
Right. Oh, yeah, that's
if you
right.
learn something, you're not back where you were. You're at a different place, but
right.
You're not at the bottom anymore. You just fell down a rung or 2, but you're not at the bottom.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So okay. So I think that explanation was great, and I guess where I would go next is asking you 2 questions. If that is sort of the journey that people go on from being an average sort of performer to an extreme performer, but then even before you get there, taking a step back, how would you describe an average performer, and how would you describe someone in your mind that becomes an extreme performer? And we talked about, and before that, you mentioned a quote, we were Facebook messaging back and forth, and it was something that you said that sort of sparked for me the whole way that we would go on this talk, and I want to just read it because you said, in my view, the difference between average performers and extreme performers is almost always their personal psychology, right? And I'm very curious about those definitions and how you get there, right? Because people, and people come here, I think, to this show, and even myself, I started this show because I wanted to be better. I wanted to go farther, and I wanted to do more, and I knew that the answers were out there, I think, and that the information was out there, and that it was possible, but I wasn't really sure how to get there, there are about 10 questions in there, so I'm going to let you just run with it for a minute and go wherever you want, okay?
All right. So I think one of the things that you will see that really differentiates average performers from extreme performers, that extreme performers are performing extremely well in a small number of areas.
Okay.
In other words, they're saying no to a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I think average performers are taking their direction from the outside world, and they're kind of saying yes because they can do something. Somebody asks them to do it, and they can do it. And I would like to say that I am a really good example of that especially early on, if you were to look at my resume, my Vita,
mm-hmm.
and try to figure out, why'd she take that job? Why'd she take, you don't see a theme, but I can tell you what the theme was. I needed a job and paid.
Right.
That was the theme, and it was in psych. But it wasn't until I started saying, just because you're good at something doesn't mean you should do it. What you really should do, and this is sort of a spiritual journey, I think, for people, is presuming that you were put here not to be a generalist, but to be a specialist, that there was some particular talent that is in you, some particular passion that is in you that was built into you, and that's your job. Your job is actually to not be a generalist, just to find that thing, that particular thing, and get super good at it, because the world needs that thing, and that's why you were put here.
Right.
So for me, I'll give a really simple example. I'm particularly good with interpersonal things, which is why I do a lot of couples counseling. I used to say I got that way because I was lucky in 22. At age 22, I met my mentor, and then that was his methodology. But when I look back on it later, I thought there were a lot of people in that class with me, that could have taken this interpersonal methodology, and none of them did. So it really wasn't that I happened to find a mentor, like I was just in the right place and then I'm just following in his footsteps. It's really that I'd been looking, I just didn't know what it was called. And then when I saw it, I knew it. And then I pursued that. So being good at interpersonal things means actually, people want you to specialize in helping with parenting and helping with I get called in to do stuff with organizations like key employees that are problematic, all sorts of things. But what I'm actually really, really good at, and what I can do all day long, is a thing that I call argument clinics, which is helping people in the moment try to make the case to somebody that they care about, they love, often their spouse, sometimes their child, sometimes their business partner. Have a good argument. And why do you want a good argument? Because you will learn stuff that you need to know about you that the other person knows that you currently don't know. And if you learn it, then that relationship can become stronger. And why don't people have those conversations? Because they're afraid of breaking each other. And why are they afraid of that? Because they've broken each other. Yeah. So I'm particularly good at that single thing. And what I have moved into in the last year is saying, there are plenty of people who can work with people on anxiety. There are plenty of people who can work with people with depression. There are plenty of people who can help organizations with strategic this or that. But there are very few, in fact, I only know one, who really understands arguing in such a way that it can be fun and it can be relationship building and it is needed. And part of how you know you're on the right track, and I think this is what extreme performers do, as soon as they come up with that thing, and that can be a very long journey. I'm 58. I've been working in psych since 1980. One is that when you say that, you can say it in a really short amount of language, and everybody gets it, and they go, oh, I need that. So there's a buzz around these argument clinics that I've never seen around anything I've ever done professionally. So one thing is learning to say no to that which you are good at, but it still might be something other people can do. So if they can do it, let them do it. You do the thing that nobody else can do. That's one thing, is saying, that phrase, the good is the enemy of the great. I think you have to really embrace that and figure out then, okay, then what is my great thing? Because it's going to be a specialization. And I usually say to people, hopefully this won't be too offensive to anybody, you sort of know it's your passion. If there's a choice between sleeping and doing it, you might decide to do the thing that you're passionate about. You also might know it's the thing you're called to do if it's a choice between sex and that thing, and you might do the thing. You might not do it, might not hop into bed and have sex. So it's a very powerful thing. So that's one thing, is you have to get comfortable with the idea that you're here to be a specialist. You are not here to be a generalist. I'm a generalist in a lot of areas. I can hang some drywall, but it's not. It looks like a do-it-yourself job. Right. But if you watched me do an argument clinic, you would think it was artistic and masterful and all sorts of things, and it comes very naturally to me. So I think that's one thing. Stop being a generalist and pay deep attention to yourself and to your passion. And I don't think just, do your passion, the money will follow. I think after that you have to get super strategic. Like, exactly how does that particular thing meet a market need? And you have to meet a market need. You can't give something that you can't force something down people's throat because they need it. They have to want it, and you have to make it in some sort of thing that they can see how it is that this thing that you're good at really fixes a real-life problem that they have. You can't fix fake problems. You have to care about your people enough to know they really have a problem. They're suffering. And what is it that you do to help them suffer less? And that's what your thing is. That's what your business is built around, for lack of a better way to put it. And then there is no shortage of people with passion who understand that there's a market need, who still will not work on themselves. And if you look at extreme performers, they work on themselves spiritually, they work on themselves emotionally, they are lifelong learners, and they work on their physical fitness. They work on solid relationships, and they work on their money. Those are the 6 broad areas: spiritual, emotional, physical, intellectual, social, and financial. They work on those things. They don't expect those things to come easy. They take it as, this is my responsibility. I can't count on anybody else for this, and not because people don't care about me, because, hey, you know what, they have their own things to work on. So you have to work on all those things yourself.
Is there one area where you would think that someone should start?
I think emotionally is what gives everybody the trip up. Chris, because I think, if you think about spiritually, they can go to church. Physically, go to the gym, watch people, watch trainers, pick up a thing or two. Intellectually, everybody knows how to, do a course. Socially, figure out how to bar hop if you're young. If you're not that young, then figure out how to have dinner parties. Financially, there are all sorts of people who can give you, financial direction and business planning. But emotionally, I think that's the one where people come up short. So I did think with your group that if they wanted to get their pens out right now, this might be the thing that I could give them that would be of value. If you want to move from that category of languishing into really flourishing, into really loving your life, enjoying it, being really productive, it's the completely engaged, that thing that everybody wants. It's mostly about being able to really be a skillful manager of your emotions. And for attorneys, the work that you do is by its nature adversarial. We have a justice system where somebody's supposed to win, somebody's supposed to lose. And even with things like collaborative divorce, and even restorative justice sort of things that the legal profession is involved in, the basis still is adversarial, and that sets attorneys up for depression. It's one of the highest. It's one of the fields with the highest amount of, one of the professions with the highest amount of depression.
Definitely.
So attorneys in particular, I think, really have to learn how to not have their professional work wreck them emotionally. So here's the tip: if you think like fractions, and you put above the line positive emotions, and you put below the line negative emotions, you're really shooting for a ratio of 3 to 1. So like 3 positive emotions, 1 negative emotion. And if you think about if you have a lot of negative emotion in your life, the smart money is not on trying to, I'm a fan of people trying to cultivate positive emotion, and I teach how to do that. But when I look at what's really problematic for people, it's not so much that they don't have enough possibility for positive emotion. You can say to people, cultivate positive emotion, be in nature, savor sunshine, sunsets and sunrises, eat your food slowly, spend time with your children. You can tell people to do all of that, and that's fine and dandy, and they will do it. But if their negative emotion quantity is too high, it's just almost impossible for people to really flourish. So you do have to put effort into reducing the negative emotion. And the good news is there are only 3 negative emotions to worry about. So one is anger, one is fear, and one is contempt. And when you think about the only profession that I know of where the word contempt actually has a meaning is like contempt of court, right?
Yep.
There's no other profession where that word has a specific meaning. So you can see sort of why attorneys are really at risk here for a really negative interior life. The antidote to anger is not revenge. Revenge actually doesn't. Anger is the result of perceiving an injustice. And by the way, usually that's because there was an actual injustice. It's not really that somebody's, some kind of a hothead. Usually, hotheads can actually see injustices faster than the rest of us. So there is an injustice in the picture. It's perceived as an injustice, and then the automatic reaction to that is anger. And anger creates an automatic behavior of attack. So with a lot of anger in the picture, people spend a lot of time thinking about attacking. Not physically, but they get in attack mode. The antidote to anger is forgiveness. It isn't revenge. It actually, it'd be lovely if it's justice, but It's not. The antidote to anger is forgiveness. People have to come to terms. It's an adult developmental task to decide what we're going to do with the fact that we live in an unjust world. And the people who have the hardest time with this are people who have a worldview that it's a just world. It's not a just world. Otherwise, all the nice guys would have all the big cars.
Right. So how do you, here's a question I have, Len, that I know some of us cynical attorneys out here will be asking is how do you separate forgiveness from, I guess, I can't think of any better way to describe this, but like being run over by people, right? Does that make sense?
Well, I consider myself a pretty, because I've worked on it, that not only do I forgive, but I actually consider myself a forgiving person. But I don't think anybody who meets me ever thinks I'm some sort of milquetoast that you can walk all over.
Right.
Forgiveness is actually not for the weak, it's for the strong. Weak people can't forgive. The process of forgiveness, I think, when I'm working with people on that, I almost always know I can't even bring it up until they're strong enough to approach it.
Right.
So that's one thing, is like there's nothing, I believe, really, Chris, that forgiveness is the hardest psychological thing that a human being does, because they are entitled to justice, and by entering in a forgiveness process, they're making a very simple decision to give up their right to justice, which is a very difficult thing for human beings to do. And that's just, there's a whole methodology to that, but that is the antidote. And I'll give a book. I think the best forgiveness researcher in the country is actually right here in Wisconsin, over at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His name is Robert Enright, Enright, and he has a book out that people can find. He has a couple. You'll be able to find that. So that's what you do with that one. With fear is a result of perceiving threat, and it creates the automatic behavioral response of escape. And there are a few people who are fearless, but most people who are courageous actually build skills. So whereas forgiveness is the antidote for anger, skill building is the antidote for fear, because fear is a reaction. Fear is an awareness that challenge which life has thrown at me, my skill sets are inadequate to meet it. So you can think about something really simple. I'm not a black belt, but I grew up on a farm in Iowa, and I'm built like a Russian peasant. I mean, the joke in our family is that you could hook a plow up to any of us, and we could plow with people. That's what we're built like. So I'm not as afraid as some women would be, like walking down the street. Also, I have psychological skills. I'm not afraid to have conversations with strangers and to figure out what the actual threat level might be for me as a woman. But those are skills that I have. So besides having, physical strength and working out and just, having strong upper body strength for no reason of my own, except that I was given it, just like blue eyes. But there's skill building that I certainly needed around money that I didn't have. And, it took me a while to get comfortable with even talking about finances, because I didn't have that kind of a background in any way, shape, or form. My parents were hard workers, but it doesn't mean that they were geniuses around money. So that's an area that I definitely had a lot of fear in. And I would still say, if I were to look at my whole profile around being in business, that the number one area that I remind myself, Julie, emotionally, this is an area where you are going to have more fear because you don't have skills like people who, grew up around Wall Street bankers have. So that's an area that I say, well, I have to keep building skills in there. I have to keep learning. And in fact, that's a big part of what being in the plat is for me. It's not about doing therapy. It's about running a business, right? So learn how to do that. So the last one, Chris, is contempt.
Before we get to contempt, though, I have two pretty good examples about fear in that I think that come from my firm in two different ways. The first is when I've experienced this myself, but even with my associate attorney, we sit down and talk, and I would ask her, why aren't we taking this case to trial? Or what's holding you back from taking this case to trial? And I ask why a bunch of times, and then at the end of the day, a lot of times what it comes down to is fear of failing, or fear of looking stupid in front of a jury, or in front of a judge, or in front of your peers, and things like that. And what I would always tell her is, I would tell her, look, I feel the same way. And the way that I would overcome that fear is I would say, okay, what am I actually afraid of? All right, I'm afraid of the judge, yelling at me. Why would the judge yell at me? Because I didn't know something. So I would say, okay, I'm just going to make sure that I go and learn everything I can about that, and just know that I'm as prepared as I can be when I go in there. And that's the way that I overcame that fear. Same thing with doing. I'm pretty outgoing generally, but when it comes to meeting new people, just cold, I'm not great at it. It's not one of my best skills. Mm-hmm. But I have these networking meetings that I will set up with chiropractors and with other potential referral sources and things like that. And I was afraid. I talked about this in another podcast episode of driving around the block, like 3, 4, 5 times.
Yeah.
And eventually just going, look, I've taken the time not just to set the meeting up, but I've also taken the time to really think about where I want the meeting to go and what I want to talk about and what I want to do. And I know that if I can just get in the door, that everything is going to work out fine, Mm-hmm. And then I just basically do that, and I just understand that, I like you said, I am prepared to sort of face these fears, and then I just push myself through it, by knowing that I have put the time in to be able to tackle the obstacles or just tackle the things that I know I need to do. So I think I'm pretty sure there are a lot of people that listen to this show, attorney-wise, that have both of those problems, both kind of from a business standpoint and from a lawyer standpoint. And so I kind of just wanted to share those stories for that reason.
Yeah, I think attorneys face something that I face as a psychologist too. I mean, I'm very reluctant to tell in a social group that I'm a psychologist, because I always say, "Oh, well, there goes conversation now." Now it's going to be a terrible conversation, because there's usually a comment like, "Oh, are you analyzing us?" or something like that. And the number one profession to get negative jokes made about it is our attorneys. So
yes.
So here's what I think about the fear thing. What you happened onto there was you sort of talked yourself into it. But into doing that stuff, and it worked. And here's what I would say that psychology has to offer attorneys, which is there's a whole science to that. So you did 2 things that work. There are about 8 things that will work. Those 2 things work for you, and you might need to learn nothing else for the rest of your life in terms of fear management.
Sure.
But for example, so one of them is do your homework, right? If you look at people who look courageous, they are always more prepared than people who aren't, who are really afraid. So, they're people who are courageous do things like, they get the book Worst Case Scenario Things, and they start reading that, like, okay, if a shark comes at you, do this.
Right.
And you go, really? There's no shark here in Milwaukee. Yeah, I know, but just in case. Well, people who are regularly building skills and building the repertoire on purpose, for the purpose of, I don't like being a scaredy cat, figure things out. So, for example, like what you said about being socially, not as skilled as you want to be. I avoided taking. I never gave a speech in college, so I didn't know that was a part of school. And I didn't have to take speech. It was probably through a scheduling error. I wasn't put in, freshman comp, freshman logic, and freshman speech. So there I am as a freshman taking all of these other courses, watching most of the freshmen prepare for speeches, and that terrified me. So I figured out which classes I wouldn't have to give a speech in, and I got out of 4 years of college without having to give a single speech. But then I got into my first job after doing a master's degree, and what they do in mental health centers is the new kid on the block has to do all of the public service speeches on depression or on whatever it is, you know, handling unemployment, whatever the current issue is in that town. And so those requests from the public to come out and do a talk were all put in my inbox. But by then, and this is something that is very much around social anxiety, people really need to understand. By then, I had done interpersonal growth groups, and so people changed for me. My view, and this is all you have to do for the most part to get over social anxiety, you have to, if you stop thinking about the world is filled with critics. Now, I think this is different. This is less true for people in law than it is for all the rest of us. But if you start thinking of the world as made up of people you're interested in possibly serving, as opposed to the world is made up of people who are going to laugh at you if they have a chance, then speaking in front of people becomes an act of, it becomes a gift, as opposed, you know, to as opposed to, you know, a burden.
Right.
So I now regularly do public speaking. Excuse me, and I been good at it, and I haven't done training in it. I just, you know, go in really prepared, but also mostly prepared, thinking about these people in the room are going to have a better life if I can get something to them that's inside me right now, they'll have a better life, and that will feel good to me.
Right.
Now, I think your profession, I've had I've more than my fair share of contact with attorneys, probably partly because of my profession. But I think, and my niece, who I adore, just became an attorney, and she called me for some advice the other night, complaining about this thing needs to happen, a restraining order needs to be filed, there's a domestic violence thing in the picture, and, you know, already really demoralized about, you know, being an attorney is all about the money. And I said, well, let me give you my perspective on that. I can say to couples who I think could save their marriage because your fees, you know, I said to her, it's okay, honey, keep your fees really high, because here's what I get to say to couples. Yeah, you can go get a divorce if you want. It's $25,000, or you could fix your marriage for $10,000. I mean, you know, think about it.
Yeah.
And I said, if you drop your prices, I'm in trouble, because that's a really nice piece of leverage that is, you know, you want it to cost a lot for people to fight. You do. It should cost a lot for people to fight. It should be expensive for people to be trying to pull the wool over on each other, you know, at a contract level, or, you know, whatever it is they're doing. It should be expensive, you know, for somebody to screw up a surgery, and it should be cheaper for them to do the surgery right and to not have any kind of injury. Or it should be expensive for somebody to drive in a car and hit somebody, and then, you know, attorneys should be making a good living. It should be expensive for people to fight, because that's incentive for us to try to get along.
All right, everyone. Now I want to take another time out for a sec. A lot of people think the Law Firm Marketing Mastery training programs are just about making money, and honestly, yeah, there's a lot of that. Spend some time with me and you're definitely going to be making more money. But there's so much more to it than just making money. It's important to be rich and have a great life too. I want you to be great at work, great at home, great with your friends and family. I want you to step it up everywhere. I want you to get results with your life, not just with your business. And the results are real. I've had many conversations with members who are experiencing big time success. If you're listening to Law Firm Marketing Mastery, you are the type of person who's already interested in improving themselves. There's a lot of options out there today, and I think you have already decided. If you want to check out your options for improving your business and living the life of your dreams, check out lawfirmmarketingmastery.com/confidential. Hope to hear from you soon. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Well,
to try to do the right thing, and it's a good thing. You guys should not drop your fees.
It is, but I guess I would have to slightly disagree with you about why we have high fees, though. For me, it's not about making them pay, right? For me, it's about the value provided, because the downside, for example, let's say in a family law situation, you know, the downside to not having a good lawyer on your side is the potential to lose a lot more money on the back end. The potential to lose, if you have children, you know, your ability to spend as much time with them as you want, and things like that. Even with, let's say, a drunk driver, right? For someone that comes into my office, that has been charged with DUI. For me, it's more about you want to make sure that your life moving forward is the best that it can be. You made a bad decision, and if you did do it, you will pay for it, right? But it doesn't have to follow you forever, and we can sort of help you prevent that. So it's about value. It's about value for us more than making people pay for what they want. Even in a contract situation, it's sort of like, this may cost you, $25,000, but if it's a $200,000 contract, you want to make sure that it's right. You want to make sure that everybody understands what the terms are going in, so that you don't have to fight later. That kind of a thing.
I completely agree with you. I mean, the two lawsuits that I've been involved in, that I won both of them, but at the end of the second one, there was we're going to appeal this. So by then I felt in a very arrogant kind of way that I understood the legal system enough that we decided to do the appeal to the state Court of Appeals pro se, and we won. But by the time, and I had graduate students so I could help, and I've written papers, and so I sort of, I can write, so that helps.
And you can research. So you're going to
I can do research, and it's online now. Right. You can get it, so it was a lot easier than it ever would have been back in the day. But by the time I got done with that, I walked around going, if anybody wonders why attorneys are paid what they're paid, I can tell you, I will never do that again.
Right.
I don't want to develop that skill set. I'm glad that we did it, but, and I'm thrilled for how it turned out. And I always say I should put that on my Vita that I have. I argued a case in front of the Court of Appeals in Wisconsin and won.
That's pretty
without
good,
an attorney.
Actually.
I know the judge whose ruling was which was appealed. He said, and he called me after, I don't remember what it was. I had a piece of paper he suggested I file. He called me on my cell phone and said he was retiring and he noticed that and I should do that. And he said, well, now I will have to say, nobody wins on appeal without an attorney, except one person did in my career, and I thought, okay, yeah, I did, but I had to set my life aside to do all of that. So I really, we won the appeal, but would it have been cheaper for me to hire an attorney to do it? Yeah, if they cared about it as much as I did, it for sure would have been cheaper, because I could have done the thing that I'm good at, and it would have been cheaper time-wise.
Right,
but,
and you were lucky
a lot of ego got involved there, so it would have been smarter, too.
Right, yeah, you were lucky not to mess it up, too, really. It's I can read a book about how to do a surgery, but, no one probably wants me in the room, So, that's a perfect story. Right?
Yeah, no, you guys are you're worth what you get paid. I don't. I wondered earlier in life, but I don't anymore. So the wise ones among us know you're worth what you're charging.
Right. Well, that's good. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
I'm curious about some of these other. You mentioned there were, I think, 8 ways to overcome fear, and I think fear is one of the biggest things that we tackle as business owners. I think really. Is where I'm coming from sort of with this show, and a lot of what I talk about is overcoming fear when it comes to, a whole myriad of things. So I'd love to hear, and we're getting close to time, and I want to respect your time, but I'd love to hear just maybe a quick rundown of some of those ways that you can overcome fear. Those, I think there were 8, right?
Yeah, and they're actually, that's the whole course that we teach. So to give it so it's an online course. So let me see if I'm trying to think if I can do that quickly in the amount of time we have. But I'll go into a few that for sure people can do.
How about this? Give me the 2 or 3 best ones, and then we'll talk. You can tell people where to go to get the rest.
Yeah, here's one that will work maybe for you in your particular situation, is that if you're going to a networking meeting, and if you show up at the meeting and you don't know the people and you don't know the place and you don't know the parking, you're stacking things against you if you're a little nervous about social things. So what do? You go there the day before, you look at the building, you walk in the room. I never give a speech without going to the place ahead of time, and I don't mean the night before. I usually, unless it's out of state, I drive to the place, I get a maintenance guy to let me in. I go stand there and I look around, and then I get a visual on what it's going to be like for me to be in that space. So public speaking still doesn't come naturally to me. I still get the jitters. I still whatever. But that's one thing. So that's part of it's part of visualizing. And also a lot of people handle fear, and this seems really corny, but it actually works. They have a lucky this or that. They have something they put in their pocket. Or I just saw Aaron Rodgers the other day in the Packers game. He goes over to rub the red beard of some guy who does, I don't know, internet media stuff for him. And that's like, okay, this is a guy with super amount of talent, and he still has, his own version of a rabbit's foot. But people who have those actually manage fear better. So it seems corny, but if you look at people who manage fears, they have highly developed rituals. So they don't, part of what a ritual does, like baseball players, you can see them do this. They bounce in a particular way. They the ball, or especially tennis players do this. They have a whole pre-performance ritual that gets them in the right state of mind. So people who say, no, I just wing it, it's like, well, then you're going to be more anxious and you're going to screw up. Don't wing it. Create rituals that put you in the frame of mind. So I do it. I mean, I won't go into a simple ritual I have for public speaking, for example, is that I go to the room early. I make sure technology-wise everything is set up enough, and then I talk with the technology people, and I turn it over to them, and then I get out of there. And then I spend time walking around the building, either inside, outside. Sometimes I have to just go to the women's room and just sit there for a while. But I spend a solid 5 to 7 minutes right before I'm introduced doing a really simple thing. I remind myself where I came from. I remind myself of all of the stuff that I have done in my life that I achieved. I remind myself of obstacles that I've overcome, and I remind myself that everybody in that room is hoping that I do well, that they are not there. They're coming there because they want to get something. They want to get something I have to give. That's the point of this. The critics in the room just want to do their own speech, and maybe you can help them become somebody, who can be doing their own keynote. And that really simple 5-minute ritual puts me in the exact right frame of mind that when I walk in, I am truly looking forward to talking with them. And that I don't vary from that. Somebody could tell me the place is burning down, and I would say, I'll come out in 5 minutes. I need to finish this whole interior story of like, why are you doing this? What are you here for? And you'd think if you do that long enough, you don't have to do it anymore. It doesn't. I do it every single time. And I know I'm going to do it, and it's soothing to me. So that's rituals calm people down. So you should have them. You should have them. Almost every time somebody moves up a level and they're less anxious, they've worked on their spiritual life. They have come to look at what they're doing as larger than them. So, believe it or not, one of the best fear management strategies is to become a person who believes in stuff that cannot be seen, that cannot be understood, but can be believed in. And when people say, I'm not that type, I say, well, you can't see gravity, and that you assume you're not going to float through the ceiling right now. So you do believe in things that can't be seen. It's a matter of doing it intentionally. And people who are high achievers manage their fear very much by a kind of intentional mindfulness around, I am a little thing in a big universe, in a big whatever, and I'm just here to do my part. So ironically, making yourself tiny makes it easy to do things. And there's a flip. The interesting thing is the flip side of that, seeing yourself as what you're doing here is the most important thing in the world, and that's why you're going to do it well, also works. So if you think about how parents often are amazing with their children because the kids are the most important thing to them. And so they pull off amazing performances, and, they work 3 jobs sometimes just to make sure that the kids are okay.
Yep.
Well, they would never be able to work 3 jobs for just themselves, but they can work 3 jobs for their kids. So that's the flip side of that. You know, on the one hand, you see yourself as completely insignificant, and you know, this, you know, how life turns out is under the control of all sorts of forces. There's nothing I can do to impact them, so I'm just going to do my part, see what I can do. And then the flip side of that is, I'm going to perform in such a way here that my children would say, if they watch this on the internet, they would come up to me and hug me and they say, "Dad, you're awesome."
Right.
You know, "Mom, you're amazing." Okay,
Yeah.
then now you're going to act in a way that is completely consistent with your value system, and it's completely consistent with the values you're trying to teach your children, because that's the number one thing you're trying to do on the planet. And that makes it very easy to push through, especially the kind of fear that you're talking about, Chris, we call social comparison, and social comparison wrecks people. It's like, what do other people think of me? At some point you go, I don't care what other people think of me. I care if I'm living according to my values, and if my kids would believe that if they saw me.
Right. Definitely.
You know, nobody at a funeral cares that much about the people they barely know think of them. They, you know, you want your kids to be able to stand up there at your funeral and say, "My dad was awesome."
Right. Definitely.
And not everybody can say that about their parents. So,
Yeah.
you know, be that parent.
Right.
And then approach what you do with your clients, with the judge, with, you know, really think about living like that. And that reduces a lot of fear.
Right.
Other people, the insignificant other people, and I'm not saying people aren't important in general. I don't have that belief at all. I have a belief that personhood is sacred, and really that nobody is the lesser. On the other hand, it's the truth that there are particular people you love so much, you respect them so much, that they're actually your audience all the time. So perform for them,
Right.
not for people who they might become a part of your audience, but you don't even know them well enough to be afraid of them, really.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a few, and
Yeah,
I know
those are
that
great.
you know we need to go here, so your show doesn't go over. But
Yeah. So why don't we just wrap up by, you know, you said you have a course that sort of outlines all 8 of these. I would love to be able to tell people where to go to check that out if they want to learn more, or just want to learn more about you and the other things that you have, because you have you like you mentioned, I think at the very beginning, I think they're books or they're ebooks or something, but you have written and created courses about several different areas that I think
Right.
people that listen to this show could benefit from checking that information out. So how can they find you? And
they can Google me. They can just Google my name, and they'll get to my website. And on my website, they can wait a few days, and there will be a better website. After January 1, in theory, there's going to be a new website that should be a lot easier to navigate than the current one, but they can still find it.
Right.
And they can look for, we call it the Year of Personal Growth. So
That's
that's
right.
12 courses. They can buy them all together, but they can buy them one at a time. And the Courage course is actually a very popular course. So it's called The Science of Courage. So they can go to my website, look for Year of Personal Growth, and they can click, you know, right through it. And, you know, there's some descriptor on there, and then they can purchase it. And then what happens after that is we send them an email, they get a password, and then they get into a membership site that has all the videos. It's 5 modules. All of the courses are 5 modules. We always use a textbook, even if people don't read it. I just think it's nice to have one. So there is a psychologist in the country who is the foremost, I think, expert on courage, and we use his textbook. And then I do. You don't have to read it, but I always think it's sort of nice to go back to.
Definitely.
So then we have the videos, and I write a workbook to go with each of the courses. And the workbooks, I thought, this is an interesting thing, Chris, for the people who are in it, because I thought that probably the people who would be taking the courses maybe, you know, wouldn't be advanced degree people.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out, because, you know, if you've got an advanced degree, you've read a lot of books. Just get the book and read it and apply it. And it turns out, actually, they're probably the bulk of the people who are taking them have college degrees, and sometimes more. And that was really a surprise to me, but what they said was what they've told us is the workbook has been pivotal.
Sure.
And I'm a pretty good teacher, and I've been teaching for a long time, and that's not a new student feedback thing for me, is that, the homework that I give is meaningful and useful to people. So apparently that translated online also.
Yeah, well, I want to encourage
that's,
everyone to go check that out for sure.
Yeah. Well,
For sure.
I appreciate your interest in that, and I'm, delighted that you're doing for your people what you're doing, because, as I have used attorneys now, I am appreciative of the profession more than I certainly was before, and also now that my adorable niece is in it, I'm even extra concerned about law being good for lawyers
Right,
too.
definitely. Well, I guess we'll wrap this up. I want to really thank you. I appreciate your time and sharing everything that you did, both your technical expertise and also some of your more personal stories. I know, in particular, the one that you spoke about when you talked about why you got into psychology. That's
hard days. Those were hard days.
Definitely. Yeah. I really do appreciate you sharing that, and I appreciate you being a member of the Platt Group as well, which nobody here on the show really knows about. But I'm looking forward to getting to know you better as we move forward. And again, I just appreciate your time. I appreciate you sharing, and I think that's a wrap.
All right. Well, I'm happy to be here and see you in a few weeks.
All right. Yes,
Okay.
definitely. All right.
All righty. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Special thanks to you guys for listening, show feedback, and guest suggestions. I rely on you all to keep my finger on the pulse. So if you know someone that is a good fit for the show, let me know. Chris@lawfirmmarketingmastery.com, and of course, Law Firm Confidential details there as well. Go ahead and email or call me honestly. That's the best way to get in touch, and I'll give you everything you need to know about my programs. If you are listening but aren't subscribed in iTunes or Stitcher, go ahead and make the change there, because getting your shows delivered free to your phone or computer while you sleep is the best way to make sure you don't miss anything. Just go to iTunes or Stitcher and search for Law Firm Marketing Mastery. That's it. And if you want to write me a nice review, I'll love you forever there as well, because it helps other people find me, and it's really important to keep my show ranks up. So tell your friends, because the greatest compliment you can give us is a referral to someone else, either in person or share it on the web. So have a great week. Go out there and take care of business, and know that the work you put in today is going to pay off 10 times over tomorrow.